Welcome to The Truth in This Art, your source for conversations at the intersection of arts, culture, and community. I am your host, Rob Lee. Thank you for joining me. Today, I am excited to be in conversation with my next guest. She is a Korean-American visual artist born and raised in Chicago, whose practice spans drawing, painting, and sculpture. Her work investigates everyday life with bold shapes and colors, while her sculptural pieces explore her Korean-American heritage and identity. Please welcome Katie Chung. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks. I'm really excited to be here.
Thank you for coming on. I'm excited to have you here. Like as I try to extend and have my tentacles and my fingerprints in the Midwest, I'm glad I have a Chicagoan. That's what you guys call, right?
Yeah,
Chicagoan on the podcast.
yeah, that's cool. I'm glad you reached out. You've also introduced me to different artists, more kind of in the East Coast. So just listening to your podcast, I think it's cool.
Thank you. I really appreciate that, and appreciate you joining today. And before we get into the big major questions, I'd like to give you the space to introduce yourself in your own words. Obviously, I think there's a lot of power in that. I can use the pieces of the online bio and the artist statement, but hearing it directly from the artist, hearing it directly from the guest, there's much more power in that. So, if you will, please.
Yeah, for sure. Hi, I'm Katie Chung. I'm a Korean American visual artist from Chicago. My art practice is split in like two directions right now. I make illustrations and I paint murals, and these are mostly commissioned artworks. I describe them as like bold, colorful drawings, very graphic, cartoonish drawings. And then the other side of my practice is I guess would be described as like textile sculptures. I have a background in bookbinding, and I love sewing. It's always been in my life. So through those two different techniques, I explore my identity, my lineage, and my heritage, and I make these artifacts, I guess. Yeah. So I'm kind of a little in two lanes, but I think as a Korean American, it's like bound for me to be in this type of, yeah, position, holding two different type of like personalities in my art.
Thank you. That's great. And I was when I was doing some of the research, I was like, hold on. I was doing one of those things. I was like, you have more than one thing, and just seeing it, it's like, this is really good. This is really great. And then it's like, oh, this is also great. It's like, what? So how am I gonna, come up with questions and all of that good stuff? So, in it's talking about sort of the two lanes, what have you. I feel like there's a third one, but those two lanes that are there creatively, what is your first love?
It was drawing. I think it's so accessible and simple. That's like my earliest memories of doing art, and enjoying it and feeling like I was good at something or like doing something right, you know? I think when I was preparing for this podcast, it kind of drew up these memories of me like sitting really young with like a bunch of loose leaf sheets of paper and just like making squiggles on the lines and being like, oh, I'm doing my work. But I was like, you could be like 3 or 4. Like, what are you doing? You
Yeah.
know what I mean? But like, it was like this form of drawing, like, okay, like, I don't know, I had this idea of something and I'm getting it out. So, yeah. And then I think second would just be sewing, which is kind of an extension of drawing, really. So.
No, drawing was the thing for me growing up. This came along like I think later as sort of, I guess, storytelling. But I've been doing podcasting for so long, but it wasn't even a thing, and it's still not quite a thing in that sort of, in that respected way. It's not considered, art or considered this. It's like this is a creative pursuit that can bend into these other areas, but as far as like knowing I wanted to do something creative, artistic, or what have you, illustration was the first thing for me. I still have, I'll be 40 in January. I still have my art bag from when I was 5 years old is in my studio. And my grandmother actually sewed the bag together for me based off of, I think it was pieces of my dad's duffel bag when he was in the armed forces.
Oh my God, I love that. Like that to me is art. You know what I mean? That is like the art that is accessible. Just like things made with care and love and I don't know, attention and time. I just like, yeah, I love that.
It's really cool. I was like, oh wow, I remember when I drew this cover of X-Men from Wizard magazine back in the day. Well, maybe I'll do that different. Do you want to go back into drawing, Rob? We'll see.
Yeah. I just love the idea of just like something as simple as just, I don't know, I feel like when I heard the term mark making, that was like, it's kind of a fancy phrase, but it's also just like, oh my God, that's literally drawing. I feel like when people are like, I can't draw, it's like, okay, you can't like smudge something on a surface. I don't know. We've already gone through like modernism and we're.
You can't smudge something on a surface. I like it. I like it.
Yeah.
So in this next one, perhaps it's a two-part question, maybe, but I've read somewhere because I was going through old interviews and reading old interviews. I saw this influence around like cartoons and comics. So could you talk a bit about that? You touched on it a little bit earlier, but could you touch on that a bit and sort of how maybe the influences show up or kind of shape your art? And I have a second part to it, but I at least want to give you that.
Yeah, so I am a kid that grew up in the 90s, and like many 90s kids, we grew up watching TV while our parents were at work. Especially as like, I don't know, in my family, I was like watching so much TV. One of my favorite shows was The Simpsons and King of the Hill. And I just love like, again, like simplicity. It's just like, okay, this line indicates an ear, I just love that style. I also love the story telling The Simpsons, just like it's about a family that watches TV. And then I think as I knew that I started getting into art and getting to like things in high school, I started finding graphic novels and getting like alternatives. So things like Art Crumb, which I know you've talked to a couple artists about. I feel like the moment you find something like Art Crumb is like when you kind of find like punk rock is like music and you're like, oh my God, like um, but yeah, and then that like I love Linda Berry, I love Daniel Klaus. It's weird stories and kind of ordinary drawings. I don't know. I love that stuff. And then in college, I studied printmaking and graphic design. And I was introduced to artists like Paul Rand, Saul Bass, which I feel like are like the kings of like logos. Um, and then like Red Grooms. I just found a book on him. I nerded out. It's just like disgustingly colorful pictures of like New York City in like the 70s and 80s, you know? Um, the Harry Who, which is like an artist group of Chicago artists that went to the Art Institute back in the day. And yeah, I don't know. These are the names that kind of just pop up. I feel like these are the names that sometimes get referenced when I mention my work, especially like the Harry Who. But yeah, I don't know. I think saying cartoons and comics is an easy way to just be like, I love images. You know what I mean? Like I've seen a lot of stuff. I love art history. I mean, feel like none of history made sense until I learned art history, until there was like a picture to it. So yeah, I consume a lot of pictures. I'm sorry. I was like,
I feel like I'm getting so many quotables thus far. We're just starting, which is great. Um, this is an aside because you'd mentioned the ear thing as far as The Simpsons. For you, what was something like that was always challenging to like draw? Like, was it a part of an anatomy that was super challenging? I always had trouble with hands.
yeah, the hands when they're holding something or whatever. Um, I trace a lot sometimes. That's how I learned how to draw, just like over and over again. And then all of a sudden your hand kind of memorizes certain lines.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, there's certain that's when AI is actually useful because you're like hand holding juice box from upper angle,
Yeah.
and then it's kind of generates it, and then you're like, okay, let me just um, but yeah, I hands are hard. I feel like because of our times right now in general, I feel like just using bodies and
Yeah.
faces is kind of a challenge. I think it can be a fun challenge, but something that I'm like, I've noticed.
One of the things that I would always do when I would sketch, I'm definitely one of those kind of doodlers. If I have like ambient paper and a pencil, pen, something, I'm just there sketching away, even now. And I found this thing that I always would return to. I'm avoiding hands because it's just like, let's just keep failing. But I would always try to do like almost a self-portrait in these sketches, and they would look nothing like me. It's just like I would have like a book of these attempts at self-portraits. They don't look similar to each other, and none of them look like me. And I'm like, why do I keep returning to this? Is it like something I want to do with my face? Like, what am I doing?
I feel like that's one of the hardest artist assignments and something that I feel like I've avoided for many years. I think I've made like one piece that I've titled self-portrait and it's like not a real picture of me. It's like an interpretation, you
Yeah.
know? Because also I'm like, yeah, that's a hard one. What are we seeing? You know?
Right. It's like this is Rob after a bender drawn by the figure in the drawn by the person who the figure is made of, who has
Yeah.
not seen himself in a mirror. All of the context, that's just the byline at the bottom. Um,
Yes.
so I think and I really dig that, where you discovered the podcast, you're definitely checking it out. And I think when as I kind of look at this question I have here, this next part to the question, and maybe you've touched on it, but like when you're listening to this, or when people are listening to this, they kind of get maybe some of the references. Sometimes they're direct questions from other interviewers. Sometimes they're the style of question or the way that the questions flow. And you can see sort of like, all right, you get inspiration from this person. This person might be a model for how you go about what you do. So for you, and maybe you mentioned it in the group of the different artists that you dug or what have you, but who would you say is like a creative role model that you're either looking at how they go about their art, even specific techniques, or just sort of the creative like life, the artistic life that they live that you maybe model or get inspiration from?
Oh my God, this is such a big question. I'm gonna start with like there's a lot of people that I like chose to surround myself around. I think it's important as a working artist to like put yourself in situations where you're learning from other artists. Um, I don't know, artists, curators, just like mentors in general that I've met through school. I think in terms of like artists, when I think about like aesthetic styles and that type of inspiration, I'm really drawn to, I think it doesn't matter what the art looks like. It's like if I learned about the artist's life, I really love like biographies of artists' lives.
Yeah.
It just shows in their art where it's like, man, this person's lived. Like this is weird. Like where was their mind? And also like they dedicated so much to a certain craft. One guy that comes to mind immediately because I recently saw a documentary on him. It just came out. It's called Memorial to the Idea of a Man. If he was an idea, what a title, right? It's about this artist named H.C. Westerman, and like he's just wild. I don't know. He's like a veteran, but he's also like a crazy, amazing woodworker and like was always doing handstands and like, I don't know, he just had like a cool life. And
Yeah.
I love learning about that. But there's also like musicians, like random. I think about the life of Isaac Hayes, and I'm like, that dude, I don't know what he's up to now, but I bet it's cool. Like that is really cool. He's like doing a voice on South Park, but also made like these legendary soundtracks.
Right.
Like that sound comes from somewhere that's like that leads a really cool life. I don't know.
Yeah.
So I think it's important as an artist to just kind of like dig into history, but also your contemporaries of just like people doing interesting things, not just like what it looks like in the end, but I think especially because as an artist, it's such a not traditional path. So you got to kind of reach and take from other people's lives and be like, I want to do this. Okay, I want to do this. So yeah, I try to research into artists' lives so I can kind of enrich my own because I don't really know what it means to be an artist, and I think that's cool. I'm just making it up.
I love it. Look, I'm faking all of this. I'm not even a real person. I'm a puppet for all of this. I remember before I move into this next question, I remember at one point in this podcast, it's probably a couple years ago at this point, but I talked to the founder and curator of the American Visionary Arts Museum in Baltimore, and the she researched me, and I had like a bio sitting out there. My bio was so dumb, I didn't know what to put in there, but it was literally things that I liked. So It was just like it was like three comedians, and then where and I wrote in there these three different comedians, and the temperament of Shinsuke Nakamura, which was my favorite wrestler at the time. And she's like, I don't know who any of these people are. I know one of these dudes is Japanese and he's a comedian. So like, what are we doing here? And then I see you. And she was like, I wasn't expecting that. And we had a really cool conversation that is almost a separate podcast. We talked for like 2 hours. We did an interview, but then we kind of got to know each other. And it was like us trading off on being curious about what each other's backgrounds were.
That's cool. Yeah, it's like you never know what you're gonna learn. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. And that takes me to this, and it kind of aligns a little bit. So I want to talk about creative process. So that's definitely one thing, and I know it's multiple lanes. So it's expand on it as much as you would like between the lanes. But I'll say, and I've noticed this, and I've tried to get better at it, and I put these parameters in place that enables me to be at my best because I always have trouble starting. That's always a thing for me. Like if someone's like, "Go, talk in front of people," it's like I got nothing. But if it's like, hey, insert yourself into a conversation, and then I can kind of have a bit control in it. I find the whole thing challenging, and I've always described this podcast as like blind dating with artists. You know what I mean? It's just like, oh, oof, I hope I made an impression. So talking about your process, like generally, but could you include like, sort of what do you find the most difficult within the process and what do you find the most exciting part of the process?
I think one of the exciting parts is when you're like, for instance, for me, I'm like physically doing something. I'm drawing, I'm sewing, I'm doing something with my hands, and I'm trying to arrange things and figure out the equation, whether it's a client's need for like some sort of illustration, or if it's like an archival box sculpture I'm making for an application. Um, it's like aiming towards like what I actually want to make when something clicks, that is like the best part. And then you're like not done yet, but there's like a direction because you're like, oh yeah, this is looking good. Like this is exactly the vibe I was going for. This is like this is the look. This is like the message I want to give. I love that moment. It's like almost that middle point of just like, oh, yes, okay, pick the right fabric. Did that. I love that. I love that even more than like, oh, it's done. I don't know, like you know what I mean? I don't know. It kind of kicks my gears, and I just like get really into it. Those are the days where I'm like, I work 14 hours. I don't know. I think the hardest part is there is like no promise of getting that.
Yeah.
I think the only thing that really is like the key to that is consistency and just like practicing and being like and gaining that confidence in your process.
Yeah.
So there's like no cheating in it, you know what I mean? Which kind of sucks, but it's also like, when it clicks, that's why it's so good because it's like, I couldn't even cheat, you know? Um, so yeah, that's one of the hard things. One other thing that I think is really hard that I've always struggled with is like the post-production stuff, like writing and documentation and like I don't know. I feel like I just want to be like the factory worker that's like pumping out the art and then, but all that stuff is important. So yeah,
Yeah.
but that's what I struggle with.
Yeah, like, and thank you. That's it's so true. I relate to that where I just want to, I call it the admin stuff, any of that post. It's like, look, this is the part, and I'm shy, right? But this is the part of the whole workflow, if you will, that I enjoy. Being able to talk with someone, connect with them, maybe have a few laughs, learn about their work, but directly from them, not something that's like written online, hearing it directly from the person. Because I think there's always something like missed, in it that you get from that further conversation. But the stuff leading up to it, as far as I'm my own booker, right? So sometimes people aren't the most kind in email, and then you're like, "Yeah, you were talking to me. We're hey, same guy," or even the sort of post component where you put it out and you're like, "I feel really good about this. I'm confident about this. I think this went well," and you hope that. the partner in this scenario in the conversation feels the same and will share it and all of that stuff, because at the end of the day it's a mutually beneficial thing. You're able to share sort of your story as authentic as you'd like it to be, in this sort of medium. And I'm happy to have the conversation, but you hope that that goes well. But I'm always sort of like questioning if it went well, if it didn't, and so on, and what that response might be. Sometimes I turn it down, but when you feel like, or when I feel like I did a really good interview, and it's like, I fell a little flat. Damn.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's one of those things where you never quite like sure how it's going to turn out, but this is the part that I always try to capture, that it's sort of a good partner. There was one interview not too long ago where I just felt like I had nothing for it. I tried to give my best, but I just felt like I didn't do a particularly good job at my job. And that was one of those rare instances in doing this piece where I felt like, okay, I might not be good at this. So in putting it out later, the guest was like, no, this is great. I had a great time. And I was like, that kind of filled that back up. But during this part of it, which usually I'm super confident and happy about, I was just unsure. So getting that sort of follow up feedback felt really good to kind of, you know, make me keep doing the podcast.
Yeah, no, I think I honestly I agreed to do this because when I looked up your name, I was like, oh my God, there's so many episodes. Like you've been doing this. And then when I listened to it, I was like, okay, yeah, there has been like you've done like 500 episodes, right?
Close to 800.
800. It was like something why and I was like, oh my God, and he like wants to interview me. That's awesome. Like that's cool. I mean, what does it matter if that one didn't click because you have what 799 other interviews?
Oh,
It's almost like one little thing doesn't matter when it's like you've been doing it for years.
yeah, and it's the big body of it, of any of these things that, artists do, that people creating something and they feel passionate about that they're doing. It's like, yeah, you wrote, maybe this chapter wasn't your best, maybe you should have edited it a little bit longer, but you were able to put it out there as the rep sometimes.
Mhm.
So I was sharing a little bit with you before we got started with the mic in earnest, that I became aware of your work, I believe, like in June, aware of you as an artist, obviously, but then aware of some of your work. And it was the mural locals only. I was just like walking around aimlessly in Chicago. I may have been leaving a food tour. We'll talk about that later. But I'm curious, how did it come about? Could you describe it for us, for those who are undipped? What was the mural? What's locals only?
Yeah, I will start by describing it.
Please.
Locals Only is a window and floor mural I painted that is up at the 360 Chicago observation deck. That's on the 94th floor at the John Hancock Center. So it's a bunch of hand painted tiles with like the Chicago star. It has like kind of a checkered vibe. And then why do I keep saying vibe? Yikes. Ugh, sorry. Okay. And then no, sorry.
You're good. You're good.
And then I have there's like a set of windows that kind of separate that room from the rest of the floor, and it has different vignettes of like Chicago neighborhoods. Um, and this came about honestly because the marketing team had seen my previous work.
Yeah.
Um, and funny enough, the person one of the people on the marketing team actually is someone I went to high school with, and like we didn't stay in contact for like very long, but they saw my stuff in my social media and just realized like, oh, perfect artist for this floor. So I'm really excited that happened. So yeah.
I love the color in it. I love when there's themes that connect to a city, to a place. Like, as I was, sharing, like, this started here. It started in Baltimore. It really is a thing. They like highlight what I like about Baltimore, what's cool about Baltimore, and it's extended to looking for sort of that same vibe in other cities. Yeah, I did the smug sniff to
Oh
kind
my God, no. I don't know why it's happening. It's like not, I feel like I used it ironically for too much and now it's like in my vocabulary and I'm noticing it, you know?
it's like when you get
Um,
stuck in an accent and you can't get out of it.
yeah, exactly.
But what was the key piece of like imagery that you were definitely passionate? You're like, I really want to have this in there. This has to be in there. Like that it's maybe a hallmarks, maybe a signature for you that not only was it sort of the request to work in this capacity, but also it's like I'm gonna put a little bit of myself in there, what I find special about Chicago, what have you.
Well, so when they first reached out, I actually got a tour of the whole space and I got an understanding of like what their branding was
Yeah.
as a tourist attraction, which was very much like focused on educating guests on like the local Chicago. So I guess like the Chicago outside of the skyscrapers downtown, like the neighborhoods, like the communities that really make up Chicago. Um, and so I really appreciated that, especially as someone that grew up in Chicago and is based there now. So I knew I had to do something with neighborhoods. But at the same time, when I was first given this project, it was only meant to be a floor mural.
Yeah.
Before this, there was an artist that did like kind of a 3D mural where it looked like you were like on a crazy lift and like looking down on the skyscraper. So it was supposed to be like only a floor thing, but when I saw the room, I was like, oh, you should let me do the windows too. Like give me like the whole thing. One of their requests also was like, we want this to be like a photogenic room. That is something that's a way people are interacting with places and I don't know, in spaces. But so yeah, I knew that it had to be a busy floor because realistically, it's like there's millions of people that visit this space. And it also, I didn't mention this, it's on the 94th floor in an open air room. So the windows are like grates. So you can feel the air, you can hear the city. When it's snowing in there too. So it's like it has to endure a lot.
Yeah.
And I know it's only going to last maybe like a year or two, but even with a little bit of destruction, I want it to be a busy enough design where it would still look good. So I feel like I achieved that, which I'm really happy about. But yeah, it was like kind of a balance of like being logical about that, like the actual space
Yeah.
and then the request of the marketing team, but then also just being like, I want to do this in my style and like just have fun and pitch ideas. And if they say yes, then hell, you know?
Yeah. I love that. Like, I get more and more opportunities and being able to listen to folks who like you're describing of like, yeah, this aligns for one, and I'm able to do it in my style and kind of pitch ideas. It feels more, it's a client situation, but it feels more collaborative, more partnership oriented. And I've been learning more and more about the delineation between the two. And there are times where, someone will ask me, hey, can you do some interviews, but do it in this way? And I'm like, ugh, I don't know about that. Like, why would you hire me? I do this, and those really cool ones when someone expresses what the vision is, and especially, some of the things like during the summer, I did some interviews for our big arts festival, Artscape, and I was there like sort of live on location. And generally, I'm like, I'm not really sure what to do, but having that time and that experience and conversations that touch on things similarly to this, that I'm like, well, this is what I was planning. This is what I had in mind. This is generally what I do. How does that fit into the scope of what you guys are doing? Because in some ways, it's yeah, I was working with the marketing team. It's trying to support this initiative to highlight this event, but also show all of the cool things attached to it and really highlight the creative economy, quote unquote, of Baltimore.
Yeah. Honestly, I kind of love that dynamic of like something a little bit more structured, like a marketing team and then a creative like a challenge. Because sometimes when it's like do anything, that is just like too broad where you're like, okay. And they're like, and give it to us whenever. It's like, no, like we need deadline. We need to get this done. What are you talking about? Do any? So I love kind of that push and pull of like, we need this done, we need this then, this is our budget, and this is what we want, and this is the space. I'm like, yes, bada bing, bada boom. Maybe it's the Chicago in me, probably.
It gives you almost the opportunity to almost over deliver where, and they were like, yeah, whenever you get it back to us. And I was like, I'm going to get this back to you guys in like 2 days. I was like,
Yeah,
it would all be edited back to you guys in 2 days. How do you want it packaged? I go full production mindset.
exactly. Yeah. I mean, you have to. I don't know, when you when you're doing something that other people would want to be doing, I feel like you need to have that mindset, you know?
Yeah.
Otherwise, nothing gets done.
So I want to move into a couple of questions I have around sort of the textile work. I see sort of this use of, I see your use of like quote unquote unconventional fabrics. I may have lifted that from somewhere. And I'm particularly interested in, is it a hanbok for my mother?
Yeah, it's called a hanbok.
Hanbok.
Yeah, so that is I'll just this is a piece that's titled Kyungmi, which is my mom's first name. It's a hanbok, which is a traditional Korean dress, and it's a hanbok I made actually covered in dry cleaning tags. They're all handwritten, collected from her dry cleaning shop. This is like a really intense project.
Yeah.
It's like one of those things where you're like, you're done and you realize how much time it took, and you're like, why did I do that? Yeah, that's nuts. Um, but yeah, so it is, oh man, I feel like it was just like this idea. First off, it's like I grew up in a dry cleaners basically, waiting for my mom to get off work. She ran a dry cleaners and like an alterations shop. And yeah, I where do I start? There's so much. Um, I've always been around clothing, so I think the idea of making a garment was really important to me, and this is kind of how I explored that. Before that, I was kind of making just more like what I was comfortable with, this kind of more like 2D art. But yeah, I made this hanbok that actually fits my body, and I've worn it on a couple occasions. Um, I don't know, I can call it performance or not. I feel it's kind of interesting talking about it now because every time I say it's a performance piece, people are like expecting me to dance in it. And it's kind of asking for movement because it's like these tassels of tags, it's heavy. But I like don't, that's not me, that's not the piece.
Right.
Um, so yeah, that is a piece that's kind of like paying homage to my mother but also all the mothers and fathers that come and immigrate to this country and give us the opportunities of this country. I don't know, it's like a certain weight of being second generation. Yeah. There's not there's not many words. I feel like, yeah.
No, I mean, one, I had so many questions that, and the next question I have because it's sort of the volume or have you, but the image that I saw of it and doing that bigger dive into the research and checking through your website and your Instagram, I was like, wow, how many tags are here? Like how many tickets? Or how did you, I got you asked the question about sourcing them, where do they come from? But wow, do you remember how many there were to build this out?
Oh my God. This is probably like me asking my mother not to throw these tags out for like 2 to 3 years, except this is not all of them. This is just probably a couple hundred, couple thousand. I don't know. I will tell you it was like 2 years of my time. It's also something it wasn't like I was consistently working on this. When I was working on this piece, I was still like working other jobs. Right now I'm a full-time artist, but I was kind of juggling. This was kind of like a ritual I had. Yeah, I don't know. These are the types of works that really brought me closer to myself, my family, and my culture. And just, I think it's really, I don't know. It's been a really nice like opportunity to explore this curiosity through literally making. I feel like there's so many things that it's just like I can't put into words, and there's like nothing, there's nothing else I can do other than just like make beautiful things about it.
I love it. I love being able to explore curiosity, and that's one of the things that I hear, and I can't help but smile and show off my giant teeth when I'm talking to folks about it,
I have
because
done it too. I have done it too.
because I was you had mentioned New York a little briefly earlier, and I was just up there visiting one of my friends and going to I went to like an anime expo, what have you, which was Wild Ghost Press, and I'm like, this is amazing. And we were just talking about just chasing like curiosity and just We just literally talk like a have, and I'm like, yeah, man, I'm curious about this, and I want to do this, and I want to explore this. I don't, I'm going to be safe though, like certain things. It's like, what's down that alley? I'm not sure. Maybe check during the daytime.
Those are things you should be more careful about being
But
curious on.
but so this next part of the question, it relates to, I guess, this other piece I saw, which I'm, again, volume. So we love our customers. So thousands of sewing pins in an imperfect grid. So one, what was the timing on that, and how many times did you prick yourself? Like, is there blood in there somewhere that we can see? Like, what what do we got?
Yeah, that was a piece that was probably like a year, probably took a year. Um, it's like also the largest archival box I've made. So I make these boxes using bookbinding methods. I have a background in bookmaking, which is like kind of a little niche practice, but I love it and I use it in my practice. But this is a box that held a like foam piece of foam with all of these sewing pins in there, and it was kind of set on a grid based on like my optical, view of it, not like actually drawing a perfect grid. I kind of love that like any evidence of like a human hand I love, whether it's in my drawings or my sculptures. I I feel like that's super necessary. I also love in these pieces that it has to show my time. This is like something about the dedication of time and paying homage with that to not just like my parents, my grandparents, but like my ancestors. I think throughout this work, I've had the opportunity to learn a little bit more about not just my family history, but just like the historical context of Korea, from coming from Korea to America. And it's like, it just brought me a lot of gratitude and a way better outlook on who I am and where I come from. Pretty simple. Yeah.
Oh,
Like really different pieces, but lately the more I talk about them, I'm like, yeah, it's just I don't know. It brought me closer to my family. It's cool.
it's sometimes it's the simplest answer has the largest rewards in it. And yeah, I think it was this thing like a couple years ago, we were talking about landmarks here, and I'm big on the cultural preservation piece. And the thing that was requested was it was a audio archive of memories about this famous market here in Baltimore. And they were like, "What was your favorite memory of this market?" And I was like, going there with my dad when I was young, and we would go there and get, candy from this stall, and I would always smell peanuts. And I'm really like going back and thinking about it, like that experience very vividly. And I was like, man, I used to hang out with my dad a lot, just thinking about all of these sort of different things, and thinking about what would we do after that. Oh, go to see my grandma, and spend time with this relative, and my dad's friends, and all of these different things that I didn't think about it for a while. And that the root of that all came from, hey, we know you do this podcast. It has this archival slant to it. Would you be interested in being part of this archive here and share your story about Baltimore? So it's like poking on the love of Baltimore, the history of Baltimore, your own personal sort of history, and just connecting back. And I just remember I pinged my dad, and I was like, yo, like literally, that's how we talk to each other. Yo, I covered you in this thing for Lexington Market, and I sent it to him. And just this sort of half acknowledged pride. He's like, it's good. Glad you remember that. I was just like, yeah, bore my soul. Thanks.
You're like, cool, yeah, good job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You remember that? Yeah, those candies were pretty good.
You're like, oh, I totally poured my soul into that. Yeah. Oh my God.
So this is the last real question I got for you before I move into the rapid fire ones. And so I touched on a little bit that sort of being aware of your work was part of my first real trip to Chicago. I went to the suburbs previously. I went to Elgin, and it was a show. I went there for some wrestling thing for AEW when they first started, and they were at the Sears something or other out there. The only Chicago-ish thing that I did that week was I went to Portillo's. That was it.
Okay.
So
Good.
I got those marks, right. But going there, this most recent time, and so being aware of your work as a part of this, I feel like I had a really cool like Chicago experience. I did the little touristy thing, but my natural thing is I want to find the cracks and crevices. I want to see, what's around and walking to different places and, checking out the city and really like getting a grasp of it. So, if you will, could you share how, like, growing up in Chicago, because you're a Chicagoan, proud Chicagoan, how does this influence your style, your practice? Talk a bit about the Chicago in you.
Oh man, it is such a huge part of my creative identity right now, like professionally, which is really interesting. I feel like if you were to ask me this younger, I wouldn't expect this, but I think I'm really grateful my parents immigrated here. Chicago is a city that is like, there's so many opportunities here. Growing up here, I was able to go to like free after school art classes where it's like at a high school age, I'm in a room with a working artist teaching me about painting, setting myself in environments like that. Like Chicago really provided that. Um, and not just like at a high school level, but like volunteering and then even going to the Art Institute, different internships, different communities like printmaking communities. And I don't know, there's just so much in this city, but at the same time, it's not as large as like New York or LA, or maybe I wouldn't say large, but just like the frequency, like the like turnover. And so it just feels like people are actually sitting and having conversations and supporting each other and like sharing information and ideas and resources. So that honestly is like made my entire career, literally starting from like someone helping me from the after school arts program to get me into college at a prestigious art school that is in the city. So I don't have to pay for the dorm. I can still like commute. So like financially it was possible to, being an artist. Luckily, if I was out like even in the suburbs of Chicago, it's like there's only so many community centers or like art centers or studios that you could actually kind of get into.
Yeah.
Um, so I think about that, like the benefits of like all the programs. And now it's like I am an alumni of this, or I was a part of this residency group. It's like that is really valuable. That has brought different opportunities now, which is really cool. Um, and then I think in terms of style, like there, because it is a city and there's so much resources being exchanged, there's things like museums, but also just like gallery shows and I don't know, so much stuff is I'm just being constantly exposed, whether it's something that's happening at work. For instance, like a rule I had for myself when I graduated art school was you need to work like something art related, whether it's like being around other artists or you're teaching art or something. So like teaching art, that is like I'm still working my progress or my processes. I have access to facilities. Then also there's, I don't know, being around artists was always important to me. That's what like kept me in the game, honestly. I think if I just kind of strayed, um, it would have just kind of became this like idea rather than like a dream idea of like a dream job rather than just realizing like, okay, this person's an artist because they do this and they said so. And then just kind of,
Yeah.
yeah. I don't know if that's a big one. Chicago, yeah. I have a love-hate with Chicago too, so I don't know. Anyone from Chicago should say that.
No, I think that's a great answer. I think that's a super valid answer, and I felt that part particularly where it's just like I did the I did the business degree thing. Like I said, I wanted to be an illustrator when I was younger, and then I would hear from my parents like, I don't know if you're gonna make that money in the art world. I don't know if that's gonna be the move. Comic book illustrator? You sure? And I'm 6'4", so it's just like, why don't you play football? Like, what are you doing? Like poetry, what are these like things that you're doing that aren't what you look like? Leverage your size and literally leverage your size. And I think I kind of almost gave up the ghost of what a little bit. And but really, I think it was more of a shift. I think it was always going to be, and you touched on as far as like I need to be around artists, I need to be around art. And I think it was that, like, I'm a creative person or what have you. And I'm always wanting to be around it and trying to, so in some ways, prove a point, some ways, follow curiosity, in other ways extend what someone looks at as art, and like, whose stories matter, things of that nature is what I'm trying to prove in this podcast over and over again. Or even the concept of podcasting. I get into fights behind the scenes all the time of what it is. I'm not saying that it's capital A art, but I'm saying that this could be a medium that allows folks who, a couple years ago when everyone was remote, there was some theater that was done via this. So is that the theatrical performance not theater anymore? And is theater not art? And things of that nature. So I start having those sorts of conversations. But it's all rooted in being around sort of artists to make me seem more interesting than I actually am. I'll reference
No.
you in conversation.
Oh, it's because it's more fun. Sorry.
For sure,
Can you
actually.
imagine being around people with like no imagination, no, I don't know. But also I sometimes I actually enjoy people that are like they're just like, oh, I'm a financial consultant. And then they're like, I don't have a creative bone in my body. And I'm like, you don't know what they're talking about. I don't know. It's just kind of fun because I think looking at art through their perspective also is kind of refreshing.
Hmm.
And I think the side of, it's like when you look at the two sides of my art, it's kind of funny. One is kind of like capital A art, where maybe you'd see it more like in a special collections, like library. And then the other is more just kind of like commercial, I guess, because they are commissioned illustrations and murals. Um, but there's like a removal of my identity. And so, yeah, I don't know what I'm trying to say, but yeah, I don't know.
I hear that, and I did this thing a couple years ago, and always trying to find funding, always trying to find patrons, if you will. And I did some ghost podcasts, and just kind of an MC, and I was like, do I have to put my name on this? Because it's no me in there. It's none of the references. It's just like, give us this bland chicken. Can you boil it? Did you put salt on there? Don't put salt on. Definitely do not put pepper on there. That was essentially like what the request was, and I learned from it. And again, it was sort of that curiosity thing, and it was commission capitalistic. And I was just like, that's not really what I want to do. Like, when people ask me, why do you do this? And why do you do so many episodes and so on? It's like, because I love it and I enjoy it. And I listen to old interviews before it got all social media out and, things of that nature. And you listen to musicians, artists, and it's like, I love to do this. I have to get this out, and that's what I feel. And that's why I just kind of go back to that and always check in from that standpoint.
Yeah, I think that's important. Yeah, consistency again.
Yeah. All right. So now it's the part of the podcast that we all enjoy. It's the rapid fire portion.
Ooh. I feel like you should have some sound effects in here, like pew pew pew.
You know what? It was a podcast I used to do that had that in there. We had a
Yeah,
segment called New Challenger, and we would just have the Street Fighter theme playing. Here
nice,
comes a new challenger for each story we would discuss.
nice. I'm gonna be honest, I have no idea what that sounds like, but
Oh, it's
if
like
it's not
here
that,
comes a new challenger, and it's just the guy
oh
like, from
nice.
Street Fighter.
Oh, is that what they like spin in?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so I got four of them for you. I've been adding as we've been talking. So here's the first one. I gotta ask because, like I said, I had some really good food when I was in Chicago. So I gotta ask you, what is the quintessential Chicago food to you?
Oh my God. Everyone's gonna say like hot dog, right? Um, I feel like this spot has a lot of clout, but I'm just gonna shout it out. There's a Jewish deli called Manny's that I love. It's like one of my favorite restaurants in Chicago. It's cafeteria style. I know I'm Korean, but like, yeah, there's something about that Jewish deli that feels very Chicago. I think it's like it's the energy when you come in, the dudes, the way they like serve you, the food. There's parking. It's so good. There's parking, you know. There's parking. That's really important. Um, yeah, I think the cake shake is like a big one at the Portillo's. Um, yeah, lately though, I'm gonna be honest, I feel like I'm cooking more in the house and there's just like so many like trendy spots popping up that I'm like, I'm not sure which. spot is the best for ramen, and I've had a lot of bad ramen as well. This is about my problem with New York. It's like you get there and it's so big that yeah, sure, there's good food here, but it's like what you gotta like really dig,
Yeah.
you know? But yeah, I'm gonna vouch for Manny's. That's one I'm gonna say.
Okay. I see. Look, I took a note down. I have it like cute. I have it like this running list of places to visit, and I have it indexed by city. So when I go back, it's like, all right, Katie, I don't know. I don't know about Manny's. So I'm gonna
No,
hold you to it. I'm gonna hold you to it. I think it's gonna be good though. I trust you. I trust
it's
you
like the
enough.
type of food people like get for catering for like a funeral. It's like good. You know what I mean? There's like respect. Like
A really
it's
good
good.
description.
And there's so many things. Oh, and it's like fun. There's so many places to sit where if you're a type of person that doesn't want to sit near anybody, there's plenty of seating. Like no one's gonna sit next to you. There's definitely an option. And before you leave, there's like a coffee candy shop, kind of old school. So you can like go in there, get your little coffee and go and get your little candy by the pound. I just like, it's like a little moment.
You're selling a ticket. You're selling tickets there because it's like, oh, I get to be off-putting and I get coffee and candy to go. I'm here
And
for
it's there like forever. I don't know. I'm not gonna say like it's like 50 years or something, but it's been there forever, which is I'm always into that.
it's tight. So here's the next one I got for you. Um, so say someone's visiting Chicago, and this is purely through your lens because we don't do the touristy thing. Purely through your lens. What's one place you would recommend they have to visit? They're there for a 3-day weekend. As we're recording this, we have one coming up. So
I I'm gonna give you two answers. If you're stuck downtown, because sometimes that just is how it is. The Cultural Center is my favorite building in all of Chicago. It's a free building to go into. There's like beautiful mosaics in there. The history is interesting. I think it's like Chicago's first library or something, something with the Chicago fire and all. I'm an artist, I'm not a historian. It's
I'm an
nothing
artist.
about but it's just like insanely beautiful in there. And then there's always like free art exhibitions in there. Um, that's a spot that I love. And then I'm gonna say a museum just because I'm an artist, but there's a museum called Intuit Art Center, and they highlight outsider artists, which is kind of like not traditional artists,
Yeah.
people that are like I don't know. That feels so rude, but just kind of people that are kind of outside of the vein of like institution art. Um, and they always just have cool stuff. And it's a museum that's not insanely large, so you're like, this is what my entire day will be. And it's in West Town, so you can just like go explore the neighborhood and actually get something to eat around there. So Intuit Art Center.
Nice. Hey, two more, two more. So I'm curious as to I've read this book about habits, creative artist habits. As an artist, how does your day typically start? Is it screaming? Is it with a cup of coffee?
Um, yeah, it is usually with a cup of coffee with my fiance and my dog. It's pretty chill, which is nice, but it starts with emails. Lately, I'm trying to switch that. I'm trying to switch not starting work with emails and trying to go straight into projects. I have a couple deadlines due soon, so there's something about waking up, having like the breakfast and coffee thing, and then I have to do something physical, like stretch or kind of like move around.
Yeah,
Thing about having a dog is having to walk them. So that happens, kind of like moving my body around. And then, yeah, just kind of getting into honestly, whatever deadline is up the next. I have a list always here. It's never ending. One thing gets crossed and the next thing gets put, like, then another thing will get put on. It's blurred, but yeah. And sometimes it's me sitting here like a maniac, drawing on 500 sheets of tracing paper, trying to like build out a skyscraper image, or it's sitting on my iPad, being an iPad kid, trying to get all of the file ready, print ready. Um, yeah, every day kind of changes. I think that's the best thing about being an artist. Every day is a little different because otherwise I get really bored.
right. So here's the last one, and this is the one that artists get, especially in the visual bent, to get really tight about. But I gotta ask, what's your favorite color?
Oh, my favorite color right now is kind of this sweater that I'm wearing. I love like a marigold yellow. Maybe because we're like ending summer, going into fall, and it has both both kind of are in that season. It's also just really pretty, and I feel like I've been seeing marigolds around. So right now, I like that color.
It's a great answer. Painless answer. I love it. Um, so that's kind of it. So, one, I want to thank you for coming on to this podcast and spending some time with me, and two, I want to invite and encourage you to share with the listeners social media, website, all of that good stuff. Any final thoughts? The floor is yours.
Yeah, so you can find my website at katiechung.com, KATIECHUNG. And then you can find my Instagram at Katie Chung Art. Try to make that easy to search for me. And yeah, that's about it.
And there you have it, folks. I want to again thank Katie Chung for coming on and spending some time with us and sharing a bit of her story. And I'm Rob Lee, saying that there's art, culture, and community in and around your neck of the woods. You've just got to look for it.